engineering your ecosystem so that you can naturally become what your buyer wants and demonstrate the outcome you provide. I think podcasting is a vehicle for demonstration, but it's a slow burn.
And that then unlocked Help Before You Sell. Here we are now, 8, 9, 10 episodes in, and only now are we starting to talk about the thing that this is.
That's part of the mission we're on here, to try and help people find the best way of selling that finds their authentic self and allows them to be successful in whatever sense that might be for them.
Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell. Yeah, before my mic was my hearing aids, and that's never going to that's never going to be a good podcast experience for anybody.
No, that's not going to help anyone.
So, yeah, listener, you can be thankful that before I actually got into it, my fellow co-conspirators here said, "Pete, you sound shit. What's going on?"
Tech check, always important.
Always. Yeah, we're just practicing by example, aren't we? We're just showing the listener what to do and what not to do.
Well, as I was saying to you guys, I've just been out in the garden this morning. The sun is shining, clear blue sky. I woke up this morning, saw the first sun rays beaming in, and then I remembered today is finally the day where we're talking about podcasting.
Yeah, it's the few times that you hate being inside talking about podcasting. Maybe we could make an excursion to do an outside version of this show.
I've literally just moved inside because I thought with your kind of podcast editor head on, you'd probably shout at me if I had it's not just birds in the background. It's like people doing weird drilling and sawing and whatever else people do around my house. So it's never quiet in the garden.
That's totally fair. I am a bit of a tyrant sometimes when it comes to audio quality, but I think my objections would become moot if it becomes the outside episode and there's a blend of natural environment in there that the audience is ready for.
Well, exactly. And I don't know what we're going to, there's enough to talk about podcasting to have an entire season, if not an entire podcast of its own to talk about podcasts. But what you just talked about there speaks to, well, what's the point of your podcast? And if it is, going on more. I know Adam Buxton has a great podcast. In the beginning of each episode, he records his intro out walking his dog, and he talks about the weather, and you can hear him crunching on the thing, and that's become part of his podcast. So I don't think it's no, you can't record outside. You just got to know what your intent is and what your audience is expecting.
As long as you're consistent with it as well, and you're kind of upfront that you are outside, that you're not actually, you don't crack on that you're in your studio.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like crunchy leaves in your professional recording studio. I don't know.
So what is there to start talking? This won't be the first and last episode. Well, it's the first, but it won't be the last episode that we talk about podcasting. To avoid the possibility of opening a fire hose of information at the listener about all things podcasting, where should we start?
Well, I'm here to keep a tight lid on the fire hose.
Yeah.
You're the thumb that sits on top of the stream to make it very directional.
It's normally me that rabbits on in these conversations, but I'm going to try and do the opposite today. So
yeah. Well, I think for me, where I'd like to start is the genesis of this podcast itself. Rob, you and I, you'd come down. We had arranged to go to a day rave in Birmingham, and the day after the day rave,
we came up with a podcast. In fact, at the day rave, you started to come up with ideas for podcasts. I was like, mate, we need to not do this now.
I had 6 hours in, I was done. And Rob was like, no, we can keep going. It's like, there's hardcore raving and there's hardcore raving, and Rob is definitely a hardcore raver. But we were talking about it. Remember, Rob, the day after, it's like, well, if Activate Your Podcast is about helping people start their podcast, then really we should have a podcast because we should be practicing what we preach. But if we just have a podcast about podcasts, then aren't we in danger of just constantly talking about the thing that we're selling and just constantly, selling the thing about, get your podcast started and these are all the things that could get in your way and what you need to be thinking about. And then that was when you had the genius brainwave. Well, why don't we just step out and step up and think more broadly about where podcasting fits for a business owner and entrepreneur? And that is in the context of communicating, educating, passing on information to their ideal clients before they become clients. And that then unlocked Help Before You Sell. And, here we are now, 8, 9, 10 episodes in. And only now are we starting to talk about the thing that this is. So does that provide like a useful sort of springboard for the conversation?
It's one of the mechanisms. It's one of the how elements of how we do this. Most of my clients actually don't really care about the how. They just want to have a consistent flow of clients without it being hard and time consuming, as we would say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then podcasting is kind of a mechanism of how to do that. I wondered actually if I could just share a section of an email I received from our friend Jason Leister yesterday, which might tie into this. So Jason says, when you discover that selling slowly is actually better, everything changes. Your mind moves from thinking conversion to thinking demonstration. You loosen your grip on the actions of any one prospect and set your sights on the journey on which you take clients. By definition, advisors don't sell. They can't sell. If they do, they're salespeople, not advisors. Advisors, brackets experts, demonstrate. They do not sell. They choose an elevated path of conduct because they are earning, in advance, the honor of receiving what are truly the most valuable assets on the planet: attention and trust. This isn't because advisors don't know how to sell. It's because selling means you start already knowing how you want it to end. Making what you want a priority is a dumb thing to do when you're dealing with humans. Engineering your ecosystem so that you can naturally become what your buyer wants is a more strategic way to succeed. And I would put it to you, the one way to engineer that ecosystem is to have a podcast.
Well, we can end the episode there. We can
end of episode,
give credit and kudos to Jason.
In attribution, Jason's website is jasonleister.co, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
And his episode of The Not a Straight Line is out next week, whatever date that is.
At the time of release of this episode, it will be quite far in the past. I'd say probably a month ago, but subscribe to Not a Straight Line and do a scroll.
So I know you said that you wanted, thanks, Matt. I know Rob, you said you wanted to be more the observer in this conversation, but I'll pose a question to you on the back of what you just said. I always say these things
and it never pans out that way. So it's nice to start off with good intentions.
Why do you posit that position? Why do you make that statement at the end of what you just read from Jason? Why do you think that podcasting is
engineering your ecosystem so that you can naturally become what your buyer wants and demonstrate the outcome you provide? I think podcasting is a vehicle for demonstration, but it's a slow burn. It's a passive consumption. It's a way of engaging. I think when people worry that podcasting doesn't work, it's because, podcasting maybe isn't the best way to engage a buying audience of people who are in the market right now. They're going to Google, they're doing Google searches. They've got 7 tabs open with different providers on. Yeah, in that case, probably a podcast maybe isn't like the best return on investment approach. But if you've got quite a big waiting market of people who are slowly learning about the problem at hand and the consequences of that problem, and you need to kind of, in a sense, upgrade their level of thinking about the problem, and position you as the solution to that, then I think a podcast is a good way to go about it because it's got the flexibility of consumption. It means that they get to hear the tonality of your voice. They get to decide that it kind of communicates your values without you saying them because they get to listen to you in conversation.
Mm.
Yes, you can do that by reading someone's book or reading their articles, but I don't think anything quite comes across. I think it's a different experience when you read someone's book and you've already been listening to their podcast. Because if you then read someone's book, you actually hear when you read the book, you actually read the words in their voice because they're already in your brain somehow. So I think it's a way of having this kind of slow approach, having this long-term approach. But I think it's a way of engaging people who are a little bit further out of the sphere of influence, that they might be great prospects soon. They're not ready to buy just yet. So I think that is the use case for having a podcast.
So how just for the sake of the listener, to help them orient what we're doing and what we're demonstrating into their own world, where does the Help Before You Sell podcast fit in your mind, Rob and Matt, in the overall scheme of things of the problem that we're attempting to help experts, in particular, solve? And that is, the easiest way to differentiate yourself in the market is to demonstrate your true value. And the easiest way to do that is to be in conversation with other people. And the easiest way to do that is on a podcast. So that's the problem that we're solving and Activate your podcast. Where does Help Before You Sell fit in your mind in that ecosystem, so to speak?
For me, it sits after people have already encountered us in some way. They might have been on your Not a Straight Line podcast. They might have interacted with us somewhere else, but we are just another marketing provider. So the journey is to go from us being just another marketing provider, for people seeing the holistic nature of actually what we do, that it's not just about podcasting, and it's taking them on a bit of a journey from that starting point closer to our inner circle, where when they decide that they actually want to build authentic marketing follow-up systems, that we might be the right people to speak to about that. So I think it's a vehicle, actually. I don't think it's a lead generation thing. I think podcasting generally isn't a great lead generation. I mean, it can be if you've got a very hot topic and you've got a podcast episode about GDPR or something like that. Something that everyone's trying to find answers to. But I think generally it's more of like taking people from the outside, having already experienced us, and try to move in more towards our inner circle.
I keep floating back to the opulent rooms we created in that little funnel episode from ages ago.
You're still sticking to that successful analogy, though.
You have to stay with the wins when you make them. Like, run that ball to the end zone and into the car park. The podcast is one of those rooms, and I think off the back of that conversation, thinking of the podcast as a place that people are happy to stay if that's where they'd like to be, I think is part of the reason that we've brought this show about, and the whole reason that Help Before You Sell exists. Because the avocado toast in the podcast room, for us, is great. People can enjoy it. It brings them into our inner circle, as you mentioned, Rob. And there are ways for them to progress along that journey with us if they're looking for more opportunities to do it. But there is value that people can stay for or take away with them simply from participating in the podcast passively or actively, however they choose to do it. And having that demonstrated in this podcast with us also shows what we're explaining by demonstrating it, which is the weird kind of recessive explanation loop we get into while we're doing what we're doing, and we're doing it because we're doing it to show you that you should do it because we're doing it.
So that actually, I had a question in the back of my mind, Matt, and what you just said there kind of brought it to the front, is why shouldn't the listener have a podcast?
I don't think they should have one if they're building their opulent rooms more like hallways with posters pointing to the end door and saying, it's that way. Like, that's how I imagine a podcast for podcast's sake. would feel like in that analogy. If they are looking to have a podcast simply to have one, to say, I have a podcast, to get that industry cred, but also as not a lead generator, because as Rob said as well, it's not effective for that, but more like an extra pipe in the funnel that just pushes people all the way to the bottom. A podcast done because want podcast, I just see no value in that. But I think someone who's looking to give something to their audience and as well do something for themselves by having that podcast, I think that's when they should say yes. I think if they're not doing those things, I think they should say no.
What about you, Rob? Why should the listener not have a podcast?
I would not be interested in listening to my car mechanics podcast or my plumbers podcast or my hairdressers podcast. In fact, although having said that, one of my previous barbers did go and start a podcast where the experience in his salon and some of the conversations I heard, I was like, mate, you should probably just start, put a camera up and start recording these conversations. So he actually did create a podcast. So that maybe isn't a great example, but generally for a lot of the kind of problem immediate solution type businesses, you don't really need a podcast. It's about education. It's about nurture. I think for the arrangement where people have to get to know, if you have to get to know the service provider, like it actually helps if you get to know us. So yeah, on these episodes, we've got UP asking your devil's advocate questions and saying, what are the main takeaways, Rob? We've talked around the subject. What are the top 3 things to listen to these times? So yeah, we're going to have that. But then we also have the part where it's like, well, yeah. So far in this episode, we've learned that I like to work outside a lot, and I've been outside today because the sun's been shining in February. We've learned that you have a hearing aids, and that we go to day raves and create crazy plans. So yeah, it's a dual facet. It's like people get to see a bit of the inside of us that they maybe wouldn't otherwise get to know. But there's also a kind of practical look. Okay, you are going to get some insights, and
I'm going to push back a little bit, if I may. You wouldn't be interested in hearing your Plumbers podcast, but doesn't the plumber have the same problem that podcasts solve for experts? In that, in a customer's eyes, one plumber is the same as any other plumber. They do the same stuff. They know the same shit, and they do the same stuff to fix whatever plumbing problems you've got. So if you've got a plumber who's got a bit of a personality and, yes, you probably don't want to listen to a podcast about plumbing and about, the intricacies of different setups, and unless he's positioning himself as an expert to other plumbers. But in terms of doing marketing activity that helps that plumber differentiate themselves in the market, surely a podcast and then all of the repurposing stuff that comes out of it is an easier way for a plumber or a tradesperson to market themselves than all the other stuff they could potentially do. Maybe, I don't know.
It would definitely make him or her unique. That much is true. And I think there's also a difference, isn't there, between your business brand and your personal brand. And you might have a podcast that also builds a bit of a personal brand around you as well, which is fine. And maybe there's some benefit to that. But imagine locking yourself out of the house and you're there doing a search for local locksmiths, and you tap on the button, and rather than saying call now, it says go and listen to my 5 pillar podcast episodes. No.
Yeah, absolutely. Although the locksmith that has had a podcast for the last 18 months is likely to be higher up on Google and where you might be searching, because they've been putting stuff out into the world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, because there's a more robust base of content for Google to index, potentially. That's also true. And Google is getting better, allegedly, indexing audio and video and such like.
But what would be the podcast as well? Like, I know it hurts the exercise a bit to take it a bit further, but what would the Locksmiths podcast be about, really? I don't think it's going to be
5 ways to break into your car.
Yeah. Okay, doors open. Thanks for listening.
Well, this is where you have an opportunity to be creative, isn't it? And
every time I've had to phone a locksmith and they show up and they break into your house in about 0.5 seconds, I'm like, wow. Where did you learn how to do that?
Well, basically,
that would be an interesting podcast.
Basically,
basically, we go out on Friday night and
So there's a really interesting study that came out recently that that Sounds Profitable, run by Brian Barletta and Tom Webster. They focus a lot on advertising and ad buy in the podcast industry, and they'll often do very focused, very detailed analysis of sample sizes on podcasting specifically. And there was some statistics that came out recently about branded podcasts that people who listen to them are likely to hang around, like they are very likely to stay on and continue to listen. And that, that creates an audience of people, potentially looking to buy. And when you think of branded podcasts, you have to think of, Atlassian. Of course, they'll have productivity and podcast stuff to push their products. But you got to think like Coca-Cola. They sell drinks. What's the drinking experience in a podcast possibly like? There is evidence out there that there are people who are engaged and would continue to listen to podcasts that, on the face of it, probably are about things that you wouldn't necessarily think would be ideal as a business funnel. And maybe Coca-Cola is not a good example because their funnel is pretty, like, what are they, an N of 2 kind of cola drink in the world at this point? But the evidence is there that there are users out there listening and engaged with podcasts about branded products, and that somehow that works.
There is definitely a use case, though. I do think for anyone in a even loosely would categorize as a coach, consultant, or expert-based service provider, like, I do think it's quite an obvious thing to do. And we have some clients that that have a podcast but don't do ongoing podcasting. They just have a handful of episodes that sit in their sales funnel. So before someone books a sales call, they can automate some communications that say, great, before you jump on the call, have a listen to these episodes. And they might just be 5 minutes, 10 minutes each.
Mm.
And that's going to, again, encourage people to actually show up and,
Yeah, and you're bridging the digital analog divide there, aren't you? You're kind of giving them a analog experience in a digital form, listening to...
It is an analog experience, podcasting, I think. It's about as close to being an analog experience. It feels more analog than many of the other...
Even watching a video, yeah. Why is that, do you think?
I think it's because your entire focus, if it's audio only, I think your entire focus is on their voice and the tonality of their voice.
Mm.
You're not watching their body language.
There's an intimacy with podcasts that's different. That's hard to define. It kind of depends on the people involved. But yeah, you feel engaged with it in a different way to videos and stuff. We are starting to edge very close to the question that I anticipated would come up as well, which is I'll frame it in advice that I give to people. And that's to not come into thinking about what we're talking about with creating a podcast with an idea of what a podcast has to be. That exact example Rob talked about, where you have 5 pillars that introduce people, that's a podcast. It doesn't have to be 3 times a week, 3 hours per episode, with the most famous people you can imagine in the highest production studio that you can possibly imagine.
It doesn't have to be like a video-based podcast as well. I think that's quite a big misconception.
I want the year of 2025 is video for podcasters. I can't wait to see the video-only podcast with no audio. I think that will be an incredibly interesting experiment in engagement. Maybe that's a challenge to the listener to try and break my conceptions.
To try and work out how you can drive and watch at the same time.
Well, imagine how inclusive to the signing community that would be. People who can't hear podcasts, they're pushed transcripts, maybe video only. But anyway, my point is that a lot of people come to I want podcast, the question, with has to be weekly, has to be interviewing people, has to be the greatest quality product in the world and it has to be the cheapest thing I can do. And I can't stop until my life ends or I retire. I think you have to get rid of all of those preconceptions about it. And
it has to work within 4 weeks or we're going to knock it on the head.
Yeah. Whatever work means.
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Like success, milestones, goals, the way that you set it up, the way that you structure the podcast, the way that you record it and put it together, whether you have an editing team or not, whether you need things to be easier. Do you have time? All of these are questions that align what the podcast is to you. And that has to be how you define it. And my quibble being the asking the internet and saying, what is a podcast and how do I do one? Those kinds of questions really aren't constructive, particularly for the business owner who needs to value their time and value the service offering that they do. That's part of the mission we're on here, to try and help people find the best way of selling that finds their authentic self and allows them to be successful in whatever sense that might be for them. The coming in with preconceptions about what a podcast is doesn't help you. So hopefully our discussion is breaking a few of those as they start to think about it.
My conception of what a podcast is I think a podcast is a conversation. And it could be a conversation with a guest, or it could be a conversation with an absent listener if you're doing solo episodes. But it's as close to a conversation as you can get in an automated way without being one-to-one and having those conversations with everyone that you might conceivably come across.
And what you talked to there, Matt, also makes me reflect on previous episodes of Help Before You Sell, where we talk about this is a long game. It's about slow marketing. I think Jason used that term, slow selling or something like that. This is about, and then the consistency in there as well. This is something that you are doing to, first and foremost, engage with your thoughts through conversation, to create content which is going to be valuable and useful for your ideal client. And if you do that consistently over a long period of time, our hypothesis is that you will win and your clients will win as well.
Even if you've got clients that don't listen to podcasts or you don't listen to podcasts, like a podcast can still fuel all of the marketing that you do, especially now with the developments in AI and the relative ease compared to even just a few years ago of converting a series of podcast episodes into a lead magnet, into a book, into a series of articles.
Let's just peel back the curtain for the listener, Rob, with that. So how does this Help Before You Sell podcast do that for the Activate Your Podcast business?
Yeah, so the production process is that Matt obviously does the editing and the tying together and making this sound good and coherent. But in the process, he also sends me a transcript of the final output. I take that transcript, I tidy that up with an AI tool called Claude. Got a very specific set of prompts for asking it to review for repetition and making. You have to prompt these things in a way where it doesn't summarize and rewrite it, because you can always tell when a piece of copy's been written by AI.
Can we share those prompts with the listener?
Yeah, I mean, if you two want to talk between yourselves for a minute, I will pull it up. But yeah, that's basically the so I use an AI tool to kind of convert the raw transcript into a more edited transcript. That becomes the written version that you'll find on the Activate Your Podcast episode page if people want to read, because some people do just like to read on screen rather than listen to us for 25 minutes. That's fine. That's just a consumption preference. What I'm then doing then is what I then do is I pair two related episodes and use that material to create a print newsletter, which is forthcoming at the moment. So the print newsletter then goes out at 12 a year, once a month. Over those 12 print newsletters, you've got enough raw material for a book. So this time next year, we should, in theory, have a Help Before You Sell Volume 1 edition out. So these conversations essentially fuel all of that. And then you've also, for each episode we've got shorter video snippets, got shorter content, LinkedIn posts, obviously LinkedIn posts or Facebook posts or whatever can also be turned into ads, into retargeting ads. So you can sort of build quite a robust multi-channel system just from having the podcast as like the engine behind it all.
Just from having conversation, which is something that we're all able to do. And by we, listener, I'm including you as well.
My prompts for the help before you sell letter. So I have so the prompt that I have at the moment, it says, please act as an expert transcript editor, editing for grammar, repetition, conciseness, and readability. Wrote in UK English using short, direct sentences. Avoid starting a sentence with the word and. Do not summarize. Please mark Peter's comments in bold, Matt's comments in italics. Leave my comments in normal fonts. Please leave lines of speaker names, but remove the timestamps. That currently is the prompt that I'm using.
And we can put that in the show notes as well, just to make it easy for people to use, because we want to help before we sell.
Yeah, and this is an evolving prompt. Both the tools change and then the prompts change as I find things that I don't like in the transcript. Or what I do before, so that creates the automated transcript that goes on the website before going into the print news. That's how I also feed it through Grammarly, which provides more specific suggestions of like, okay, you've got a paragraph. How would you, where have you written something? Because often when we're talking around a subject, you'll get quite indirect language as we're kind of working out what we try to say. So something like
engaging with our thoughts.
As we're engaging with our thoughts. Yeah. So I'd recommend Grammarly as like a second step then for saying, okay, I really want to knock this into publishing shape. So yeah, there's certain tools I would use. A generative AI tool like ChatGPT or Claude, for instance, is like to do the first pass on the transcript, and then something like Grammarly to kind of help knock it into publishable shape.
So for the listener who doesn't yet have a podcast, but who's both curiosity and confidence, I guess, in doing that have been piqued and increased as a result of this episode. It's a loaded question. Do we have anything that might help them on their journey?
I think probably the place to start is to go to activateyourpodcast.com and take our 7-day podcasting crash course. I would sort of recommend that as the starting points.
And if we shave the whiskers away, my advice would be to find, before you come to the conversation, say, with us at Activate Your Podcast, have a listen to a broad range of podcasts and get an idea of what you would like your podcast to be like, and start thinking about those major questions that we talked about in this specific episode. First off, that will help you figure out what a podcast is to other people, so you can start creating a definition for yourself. Explore the idea of platonic ideals, and that will give you an idea of what I'm trying to arrive at here. Yeah, explore those questions. Decide for yourself what a podcast could be. Think about the opulent rooms. Then give us a ring or drop an email or strategy call, and we can have a chat about what your podcast looks like.
There's so many strategic options, aren't there? And there's no right answers. Like the right approach could be you out on a walk with the leaves crunching under your feet, doing 4 to 5 minute monologue type things. That could be perfect for what you're doing, but it might not be. So yeah, there's kind of like a holistic review that almost has to happen first.
Oh, that reminds me as well. The technical question comes after all that stuff I mentioned before. Like immediately, my technical brain went, okay, you're walking in the forest. How do we make that easy? Lapel mic or language. Yeah. Get a DJI mic. Think about that.
Like, no. Just use your phone. Yeah.
And
plan what the podcast will be, what it looks like. Don't guide yourself by the type of microphone you'll buy, for example.
Yeah. I think for me, that's the overwhelming message that I want to get out on this first kind of formal episode about podcasting on our own podcast. That is, you can do it. It's almost certainly an easier way of creating good, valuable content for your ideal client than you're doing at the moment. And all of the reasons why you think that it's too hard, too difficult, too time consuming are actually it's just bollocks. Because like Rob said, you can start a podcast just with your phone. And if you're producing valuable content, valuable, interesting content for your ideal client, go back to our empathy episode on Help Before You Sell. You've got a really good empathetic understanding of your market for your ideal client, then it actually doesn't, the rest of it doesn't matter. You can then start and tweak and improve as you become ever more consistent. Again, reference to other episodes. Just start the journey and see where it takes you.
There used to be an old direct mail maxim where 40% of your success would come down to having the right audience. 40% would come to making them the right proposition. But the remaining 20% would be creative considerations. And actually, the technical stuff sits in that 20%. Get the first 2 parts right first, and you're 80% of the way there.
When we get to the technical episode about podcasting, I'm going to get ready to break
I'm
all
not
these
even going to show up. I'm just going to let you guys talk.
No, I don't think I will either. No, I'll be here as a foil for you, Matt. Don't worry.
Maybe we should demonstrate what a solo episode looks like. Maybe that's what that is. You just let me rabbit on for an hour and a half about all the stuff I need to
Here's
get
what
out.
you don't want to record by yourself, yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, we'll leave this one here. Thanks, guys.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.